Zbrush Painting. So here I have a model with some color applied to it as well as material. And the process in ZBrush to start painting is to basically switch your brush from sculpting to a painting brush, which is as simple as having your standard brush selected and then turning off Z-Add. So normally you have Z-Add on and RGB off. So I'll start this head from scratch. So what I'm going to do here is to get rid of the color, I'm going to keep it on white. So I'm using my color wheel here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dock the color palette over here on the right. And inside this color palette you have something called Fill Object. So right now the settings are for sculpting. I have my standard brush and I have Z-Add on. And notice to the left of Z-Add you have material, which is the M RGB channel for color, and mRGB, which stands for material and color at the same time. So you can paint and sculpt at this. You can paint with material and color at the same time. It's not the best result. I'll show you why in a few, but basically you can do it. So let's go ahead and choose mRGB, and let's flood the object here. And I currently have the face selected. The ears are separate, so you'll see that the geometry will update on the face only. So here I'm going to choose a different material, something like basic material, and I'll change the color to blue, and I'll go to color here, fill object, and so now we've flooded this object with a blue basic material. So suppose we just want to switch out the material. Then we go to the M channel and choose a new material. In this case I'll choose toy plastic, and it doesn't matter at this point if you change the color. So here I'm going to change the color so you can see that I've chosen a different color, but even though I fill the object, the only thing that's going to change on the object itself is the material. So here what I'll do is I'll go to color again and then fill object. So now we have the shiny toy plastic material, but the color remained, which is really good because you may like your color but you'd want to apply a different material, so this way it doesn't overwrite it. So I've talked about how to flood it with material and color, but I haven't really explained how ZBrush works when it comes to painting, because it's a lot different from painting on the texture. You're actually painting on the polys. So what happens here, let me choose a decent base color for this character, and I'll just choose some light beige here. And let's get away from this toy plastic and use something like skin shade. Skin shade is a great material for, skin. So what I'm going to do now, since I'm changing both the color and the material, I'm going to go to mRGB and then once again go to color fill object. So now I have this color base on there, but I actually like the color for the ear better than I do the face. So what I can do is I can go to the color wheel, either one here. This one's pretty convenient. So I'm going to grab it and drag this over to the color I like, so it becomes a color picker. And then I can once again go color fill object, and I have mRGB, so it's flooding it with material and color, but really at this point we like the material, so we just want to change the color so we can switch to RGB. So I'll do that again, so I can switch over to a different color and then fill object and see the color update, fill object. And if I like the ear color, then I can go and drag over the picker and then fill object. So now I have the base color and the skin shaded material. Alright, so I'm going to step back here for a second and let's look at the geometry itself. So I'm going to go to the levels. I'm going to lower the levels. So you're painting on the polys. Like right now, I don't know if I have UVs, but if I do, I'll get rid of them. So I'm going to go to UV map, and I don't have UVs because delete UV is not an option. That means you don't have UVs because you can't delete them. And so let's say I'm in this base mesh, this lowest level subdivision, and if I look at the polys or the poly frame, you'll notice that you have good edge loop geometry here. This is laid out really well. Well, this is a little weird here, but whatever. And so what I'm going to do here is, like, let's say I want to paint. I can go to RGB, choose something like green, and then I can start painting. So you can see that the surface is deforming as well because I have Z-add on. So I'm going to take off Z-add because I don't want to sculpt and paint. I just want to paint. So here I'll start painting again, and we'll notice what happens here. If we zoom in, it doesn't look that bad, but what I'm trying to do here is make a nice fine line. So if I try to do that, if you notice, color is only being applied to the vertex. So the vertex is holding the color information, which means that you're not going to get enough, well, we don't have enough polygons to support something like a thin line, because if we paint, we're only applying color to each vertex. So we can never, all we can do is like fill the whole object. We can't get anything else out of this. So in order to make it possible to create finer lines, is we have to increase the resolution. So I'm going to go up to the next subdivision level and the next, and then I'm going to start drawing a line. You'll notice that the line starts to become finer. So we're getting there, but we're not there yet. Let me switch a color so we can see what's going on. And see, here's a good example. You can see it breaking up. So imagine a page and with not enough pixels to get anything sharp. So to fix this, all we have to do is go up to the highest level. And in this case here now, we can now draw some nice fine lines. So it's basically painting on the polygons, which the vertex is holding the information, but it's called poly painting. So the color is not going on the texture. In fact, we don't even have UVs. So the color is being applied to the surface of the object, which is great because this allows you to jump right in and start painting something and not worrying about having the right UVs or anything like that. You can just go in and paint. So I can actually go in and start painting at any point as long as I change my color, my brush to an RGB brush instead of Z-add or Z-sub. So you're ready for painting and it's all good. But if you go down to the lower level, it looks like it breaks up, and it does in fact because we have less polys in the scene. But if we go back up, it holds that information. But the stuff that was applied at the lower levels doesn't work so well. It's skipping these polygons because you didn't have the information there in the scene when you were painting, so there's no way for it to add it. So you basically want to be in the highest level of your model before you start painting. So we go and we paint in, and I'll do a little painting right now. Let's go and choose a base color once again. I can just quickly drag to the ear to pick that color, and then I can go to my color and make sure I'm in RGB and go to fill object. So now we have that base color. So I'm going to just lay down like a color scheme that I learned from some ZBrush 4 book, and I always thought it was very useful to set up the paint this way, and it's something that I still apply to most models when I am painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my standard brush, make sure I RGB, and I'm going to choose the stroke as color spray. This gives like a variation of like opacity for the color, and then I'm going to choose my alpha to this dots alpha, which looks similar to the color spray, and then I'll choose like a nice base color for all the cavities of the object or the face. In this case, I'm going to go in and just paint in all the recessed areas. They would be the cool areas. And another thing I can do is I can get rid of the lazy mouse, which is L. And if I hit L, then now you don't have that little red tail, and I can just go in and paint. So I'm just going to paint in these blue areas. So all the recessed areas I'm going to go and put in some color. We got a couple more here. I would say that's okay for now. And then let's go to the red and let's get all those high points. And if you look at the way this color spray works, I mean, it makes a nice base for skin. You know, it has these different opacities on the dots that it's laying out, and get a nice, some of the beige from the base coat is showing through, which is creating a nice effect. So I'm just going to lay in some of the areas there, maybe a little bit here on the forehead. Then now that I've laid down those two, maybe a little bit here, here. So then what I can do now is I can choose a base color that I like, and this would be like similar to the beige, but maybe like let's just go a little lighter. And then I can change the intensity, the RGB intensity, bring it down, and then I can just start spraying everywhere. So if you make your brush big, it's going to have these like larger dots, so I'd rather just go over it a little more with some smaller dots. So then now I'm just being a little careful on how much I apply this base or this top coat so that some of the color shows through. But I want it to be subtle. I don't want to go too much. Let's get in there. Alright, so a little bit more here, and then of course this is all preference, how much red you want to show through, and then blue. And instead of the blue, you know, I like sometimes to use green, especially around the beard area. Alright, so a little bit more back here. So you start setting up a nice foundation for a flesh tone. And then you can go in and of course change your brush to different colors. Maybe for the lips I'll go a little more like purple. Let's go something like that. A little more towards gray. Alright, so the more time you take, the better this will look. But just laying down the base colors. So now we have a color on the object, and we're looking good. Actually, let me just get the rest of the lip here. And I'll drag it back to the beige just to blend in the top. I'll bring this back to white, and yeah, so here we can start thinking about transferring this color to texture. Now this is not so straightforward to most people, but if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, the color is on the polys, and if we're going to use it in another program like Maya, or we're going to use the low poly model, then we need UVs to transfer this. So making UVs in ZBrush is really easy. There's another short tutorial on how to do it. But basically all you have to do is go down to the lowest level. Let's go Shift F. I just want to see the topology. I don't have any poly groups, so I can go ahead and select some poly groups. I can hold on Control Shift, choose my lasso, and I'll just make some quick groups really quickly. Right here I got a face group, Control W, and I'll separate the neck, something like this, Control W to poly group it. And then so I have these three groups, and I can go to Z plugin, UV master, poly groups, unwrap. So I just created UVs. How do I know? I'm going to go to UV map and hit morph, and there are my UVs. Nice and easy. Shift F, go back to it. I can uncheck solo so I could see all my objects. Actually, let's leave solo because we're just dealing with this one object. And then I'll go up to the highest level. So this is the crucial part. You have to be on the highest level. This is where you created your painting in. So this is the level you want to transfer the color from. If you go down to lower levels, you're only transferring the colors from those vertices at the lower levels. So you don't want to miss all these higher levels. So I'm going to open up something under the tool palette called Texture Map. And in Texture Map you have Create, and one click of a button, which is new from Poly Paint, because we have been poly painting and now we want to transfer it to our UVs. We click on New from Poly Paint, and there you go. You have your UVs and your color on it. So you've created a texture with the diffuse channel. So what I want to do here now is just click on Clone Texture. Now the reason for that is to send the texture over to the texture section up here in this menu. And we can see our texture. So this is a 2K map. And the only thing that's left to do is to flip it in V. And the reason why is because ZBrush uses the texture upside down and flipped in V. So now that we've done that, we can export. And then here you have your different channels, those color types, file types, 2D file types, and I can save it out, and so you just exported a texture. Now the other thing I can do, which is really convenient, is this is going to be a model that I'm going to use at the lowest level, so I can go all the way down to the lowest level, Shift F, and now that we've applied it to the texture space, you can see that we're looking at the texture at the lowest level. So if I turn it off, you'll see that the polys, they're just blurred out because there's not enough information to hold that. But the texture, it has been transferred to the texture, so all the information is just at that texture space. So now all we have to do is export the geometry of the low resolution model along with the texture. And there's a nice, if you go into Maya, you can just go to export and choose the Maya file type, or you can go to the Z plugin and FBX export, and you could export this as an FBX to use in game engines or Substance Painter, wherever you want to go with this. Couple of settings there, and that's pretty much it. That's how you paint and transfer the paint to texture. So painting on the polys. One last thing, let's look at one last thing here. So I'm going to turn off the texture and I'm going to go all the way up, and I'm going to say, okay, you know what, let me get rid of the texture here in this texture slot, and let's say I go ahead and I change the color. So I say, okay, I want to flood this with a green, make sure my RGB intensity is up, and make sure I have RGB selected. I'm going to go to the green color and fill object. So now this head is green and I've lost all the poly painting because it just overrode it. There's a way to get it back as long as you have the texture. All you do is go to your texture map channel and you turn on the texture. You see it, but it's not on the polys. If I turn it off, you can still see that I still have green. But what you can do is you go to Poly Paint up here and you go Poly Paint from texture, and now this has transferred the color from the texture onto the polys. So if I go back to texture map, you notice that this channel is off now. We're not looking at these. I could in fact turn this off completely, and the color is back on the polys. So we can go Shift D, and there we go. So with that, if you had a texture that you made in another program, you can import it into this texture channel here. So I'll just grab one of something like Target, and then I could say, you know what, I want to continue painting this, but on the polys. Then I can go to Poly Paint and Poly Paint from Texture. So now the texture is actually applied to the model. You can see that because it's turned off. And here I can say, okay, I'll go down to the lowest level. I can see it's breaking up, so it is in fact on the polys. And I can say, let me continue painting at this point. Let me just add more color. Doing something like that. And then I can say, alright, this is done. Let me send it to my texture. New from Poly Paint. Make sure you're in the highest levels. And there we go. We have our texture. And then you can clone it and go up to this channel here and flip it in V and then export. Or you don't even have to do all that. Just choose the object that you want, whatever level, and go to export and choose a Maya file and save it. Now the only thing you need to know is that there needs to be a color channel in here in order to export as a Maya file and take that texture with it. So if there's nothing in here and this is off, when you export it, you won't get the texture. So that's it for painting.